Welcome back to the Wenke Podcast, and today I have on Tanner Rynd. And Tanner, thanks for coming on. I've known Tanner since, what was it, 5th grade? Something like that?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. I would say we started to become better friends in high school. I'd say towards the end of high school. We were friends throughout high school, but we didn't do any sports together. So I'd say we started to hang out more junior, senior year. And then you went off to Pepperdine, which is a college in California, to leave us all stuck in the cold. And since then, it's been, 4 years or so, and we've both grown up quite a bit, at least I think so. And tell us a little bit about why you chose to go to Pepperdine, but more specifically, why you chose philosophy as your major.
Right. So I chose Pepperdine kind of to change things up. Like, I feel like going across the country to a place that I've never been before, it will allow me to meet a lot of new people or get a different type of diversity that I wouldn't otherwise have in a school in Michigan. And it's a good school. It looked really good when I came to tour it, and like what it promised with the small size of the school and the type of professors that I would have and get to interact with. Those were all really good aspects that I thought would be valuable, and I think that has stayed true as I've been here throughout the years. Obviously, it's nice in California. That's not really like the main reason to come out here, but yeah. And I guess philosophy as a major. I guess near the latter half of high school, as you were saying, we were getting to know each other more, and I think we were both becoming a little bit more skeptical about things and wanting to think deeper about big topics and just questioning like things that we were taught in school and how we were raised. So I think I kind of started to develop that in later high school, and as I got into college, I was like, I really am interested in this. I want to pursue this. I like talking about this and learning about it. So maybe I'll try out philosophy. And I did that, and it's been going well ever since.
Heck yeah, dude. No, that's good. That's good. So you've been doing philosophy now. You're a senior, correct?
Correct.
How much longer do you have until you graduate?
I will be taking a few summer classes, but I will be walking this spring.
Okay, so you will be walking.
Yes.
What's the next step for you after that?
The next step is not as planned as I would like it to be. I'm actually graduating a bit earlier than I was planning originally. But I think grad school is a potential. Obviously, philosophy is like a really good major for law school. I've been kind of interested in the law and pursuing that. But maybe just grad school for philosophy if that's a route that I could go.
Yeah. In terms of, the philosophical landscape, what would you say has stood out to you in terms of a class that you've taken that you were gripped by? Obviously, since it's your major, you're going to have exposure to all sides, all the way from, the theory of logic to metaphysics. So you're going to be all in there in terms of philosophy. What kind of stood out to you that's something you're like, man, I really enjoyed this?
Right. I guess a few things come to mind. My favorite course that I've probably taken is ancient philosophy, and that's for a few reasons. Ancient philosophy tends to focus on philosophy more as like a way of life. And trying to implement it more with day-to-day living and like the values and behaviors that you go about regularly. And I really like that aspect of ancient philosophy, and I feel like it's pretty relatable and needed in like today's day and age. Also the professor that teaches that class is remarkable. I'll probably mention him in a little bit, and his book actually, because that's part of an idea that I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
Yeah, but I guess ancient philosophy, logic, of course, too. I feel like that's super necessary and needed. That's like kind of the main reason why philosophy is like able to be pursued and taught as like a major, because logic is so necessary and such a good utility for people in various aspects of life, on evaluating arguments and creating arguments. Yes, besides that, I'm pretty interested in metaphysics, although I haven't taken a specific class like that, but it usually seeps its way into various different areas of philosophy, regardless of the specifics. But yeah, I'm pretty interested in the philosophy of religion and ethics as well.
Okay. Yeah, you can elaborate on that book you mentioned.
Yeah. So sure, I'll show it real quick right here.
Yeah.
So this is written by my professor, Mason Marshall, and it's called Reading Plato's Dialogues to Enhance Learning and Inquiry, Exploring Socrates' Use of Protreptic for Student Engagement.
Ooh, quite the title.
Quite the title.
Go. Plato and Socrates. Those are those are both incredible philosophers. Was Plato Socrates' teacher, or was it the other way around? I always forget.
Socrates was before Plato. He was his
Okay.
teacher, yes.
Okay, I always get that order confused. But tell me about the book.
Right. So this book, it goes into a new kind of like new different approach into reading Plato's dialogues. So normally you read Plato's dialogues, or how you teach them in like an ancient philosophy class is to analyze the arguments and get the students thinking about the arguments and whether or not they're sound, and just working on those logic skills. But aside from that, this different approach focuses on protreptic and protrepticizing, which really just means like bringing into the fold of philosophy, like trying to convert someone to a philosophical way of thinking. It's trying to, I guess, have people question beliefs that they might not otherwise through conversation and dialogue with one another.
Almost.
And actually,
I was just going to mention, almost like it sounds very similar to the basic Socratic method. You know,
right.
One of his famous dictum is, "An unexamined life is not worth living." So
right.
it sounds very similar to that. But continue. I've actually never heard that word, protreptic. Is that
right?
correct?
Protreptic.
Interesting. Yep. And I've done quite a bit in philosophy. Is that like a pretty niche term?
Kind of, yeah. It's usually used a lot in antiquity, so among like ancient philosophy type conversations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I made
No,
that
you're all
connection.
good.
So continue.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, what Plato has Socrates do in his dialogues is basically like street philosophy. So like Socrates, a lot of times he'll be talking with someone else, maybe someone he knows, and he'll just be like asking him questions about a belief that he has or about a statement that he makes. And it's interesting because the way that it's written, you could analyze the dialogues and ask yourself, like, why is Socrates asking him in this manner? Like, because he changes how he is from person to person that he's talking with, specifically on how he analyzes them and asks them questions. And this is with the assumption that Socrates is trying to like improve the person and improve them in a way that makes them think more critically. Because I feel like thinking deeper and thinking critically is a necessity for most people. I mean, obviously we're in like a democratic society where we want people to be thinking deeper about things and having more of an understanding of themselves through introspection and self-examination, because otherwise I guess we wouldn't be operating too well. We rely on reason, right?
Yeah, to a large extent, although that seems to be lacking these days, the whole reason thing. Okay, so that's the what would you say is your favorite part about the book?
My favorite part about the book, I'd say the beginning two sections and the last section. In the beginning, Professor Marshall, he talks about like two different ways to go about analyzing Plato's dialogues through this lens of protreptic. So he goes into
real quick.
Right. Yeah,
Plato's dialogues, for people that aren't familiar with them.
Okay.
Are you talking specifically about like Plato's Cave? What other like Plato's Republic? What all is included in his dialogues technically?
Right. I'm talking about just like any of his writings that have to do with like Socrates and talking to others, just his writings in general, like the Meno, Credo, Republic,
Credo.
all
Yep.
that type of stuff.
Okay. And that include like the trial of Socrates and stuff like that as well.
Right. Yes.
Okay. All right, keep going.
Yeah. So funny enough, recently it was my first time doing it. I just tried out actually doing street philosophy.
Street philosophy. Yeah.
With
that's so
random
cool.
people. So I created a list of like 10 questions, and I would go up to someone and I would be like, hey, could I ask you a quick question for like a class project? And, some people didn't want to, some people did, but then I would give them the sheet over here, and I would have them pick out a question, and they would give their opinion on it. And I would just ask them further, like, oh, why? Why do you think that? Why do you believe that? Or I would posit arguments against what they're saying in like a friendly manner, not trying to win or not trying to show them that they're wrong, but just trying to like prod them, like, couldn't this be the case instead? Like, why is it this way that you say it is? Try to get them thinking more and more about what they believe, with the goal that they will hopefully become more introspective.
Interesting. So you literally were doing the Socratic method.
I was.
Oh, that's so fun. I love the term street philosophy. It's not,
Yeah, it's
you always
great.
think like, when you like, street evangelists or like street prayer and
Right.
street, I don't know, what's the Christian term? You're trying to evangelize someone.
Right.
Street faith. I don't know. There's some
I know what you're
some
saying.
term there. Regardless, I've never heard it used in that way, and I love it. I love it. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
So I do want to return to Socrates, but I want to ask a broader question that
Yep.
I probably should have asked at the beginning: is why would someone be interested in philosophy? Why would your average person, your average person working a 9 to 5, whatever it happens to be, why should they be interested in the philosophical landscape?
Right. I feel like philosophy naturally permeates to every area of life. It's just it's not something you can really escape. Like, even if you don't know anything about philosophy, you still have different philosophies and operate using different philosophies that influence your behaviors, your day-to-day life, what you value, what you don't. And all those things are obviously very vital and important to us and who we are and how we live. So I feel like it's important to analyze those things and to strengthen the skills that are involved with them, to try to figure out, what is true and what should I be valuing. And I feel like a lot of people could use philosophy to find those things, because some people might be really lost or really lacking in different areas, and they might not really understand why, or they might not know that there's more out there, or a type of knowledge or truth that they haven't yet discovered or engaged with. So I feel like those are all valuable reasons why someone might be interested in philosophy.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I would say Nietzsche said it very well when he said, those who have a why can bear any how. And I think that statement is very true in the context of why someone might be interested in philosophy, because philosophy tries to answer, a number of questions, but one of the questions is, why you should do something or anything.
Right.
And it definitely delves into the domain of morality and ethics a lot. And it's one interesting thing is it's not always clear where the philosophical domain ends and the religious domain starts. They're intertwined to a large extent. And I think Nietzsche's statement there is both a philosophical but also a religious statement in terms of, do you have a reason to live? Do you have a why? Do you have a mode of being that justifies the suffering that you inevitably will experience in life? And I think it's a question that all of us have to answer. And whether or not you think that's a fundamentally philosophical or religious question is somewhat beyond, besides the point. Regardless, we have to act in the world, and without any kind of schema as to why we do what we do, there will be times in our life when chaos strikes and when we need that solidity in our belief structures to move forward regardless of what's going on. So I've always looked at philosophy as something not optional, but actually necessary. That you need to have at least a toe in the water of the philosophical landscape, or else you're just not grounded in the world like you could be and like you should be, frankly. So I don't know. What do you think about that analysis?
No, I agree pretty much completely. Like, it's not something you can escape. Like, you can't avoid philosophy in doing it. So it's just a matter of fact of whether you do philosophy well or whether you don't. And it's like, why not be doing it well, or at least attempting to?
So I've been heavily influenced by Socrates specifically. And I was hoping that for people that aren't familiar with Socrates and why he's such a famous historical philosophical thinker, maybe you could just provide a overview of who he is and why he might be important.
Sure. I mean, Socrates was like a huge thinker, like very like innovative, novelty type thoughts back in ancient times. He was like maybe one of the first people to be talking about self-examination and introspection and like why it's valuable, like how it allows people to grow in ways that they would otherwise not. But I mean, he also had a hand, obviously, in teaching people like Plato, who taught Aristotle, and they have been, I mean, phenomenal in the novelty type ideas that they came up with back in their day. They're very, very wise, smart thinkers, and he had a hand, obviously, in pushing forward different schools of philosophy in ancient times that a lot of people, nowadays may like or hold some part of or like believe similarly without even knowing it.
Yeah, hugely influential figure. A lot of people would argue he was in some ways the founder of Stoicism. Do you more or less agree with that statement? It's difficult to pin it on one person, but
yeah, I could see that. I don't necessarily, like, I haven't thought about it that way before, because Stoicism is kind of it's all over the place, I guess. There's a few big names that like started that are like known to be like, oh, like these guys are like the main Stoic readers. But yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. So I've been actually quite a fan of Socrates for a number of different reasons. But there was a Socrates' trial was written by Plato, and basically, for people that aren't familiar with the story, Socrates lived in ancient Athens, and it was Athens, wasn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah,
as far as I know.
For a second, I was like, man, was it? But yes, it was ancient Athens, and it was actually a relatively small town by our standards. A couple thousand people, and so everyone kind of knew each other, which was interesting. And Socrates was, in the words of his accusers, corrupting the youth was what they claimed he was doing wrong. And essentially, he was just asking them questions, the old Socratic method. Why do you believe this? Why do you do this? And they ended up actually bringing charges against Socrates, and his friends and everyone around him told him, hey, you should get out of town. These people want to kill you. Probably good to leave. We kind of like you. And what was interesting is Socrates had this concept of a daemon, and another word might be your conscience. And for Socrates, he learned to listen to this daemon, and it wouldn't tell him what to do, it would tell him what not to do. So, being a true philosopher and being true to who he was, he decided to consult his daemon about whether or not he should leave Athens before the trial. And the daemon told him not to leave, essentially, which was, quite a shock to him, because, he would like to stay alive, but it told him not to leave. So he actually ended up staying, and if you read the commentary on his trial, it's fascinating to watch him pick apart his accusers, and in his defense of himself, he exposes them all for the frauds that they are, and it's one of the most fascinating reads I've ever had, so I highly recommend it to people. But I wanted to get your thoughts, and there's more to the story, of course, but I want to get your thoughts on this concept of a daemon, or this concept of a conscience. What do you think about that concept?
What do I think about that concept? I think that it sounds like a true concept. Like, we obviously talk about a conscience in our day and age, I believe, at least a good share of people do.
Yeah.
And I think maybe when he was saying that, he might have been referring to, like, the reasoning part of himself, like his mind or his soul, that's like saying, don't do this, because it is like, usually the conscience comes into play when you do something that might be against, or you're about to do something that might be against, like, your values, or something that you feel like, maybe I should think about this for a little bit more. I shouldn't, like, be impatient and react. And I think that's maybe what he was referring to, was like a reasoned thought or a feeling, the rational part of his soul that was telling him, no, I shouldn't do this for such and such reasons.
Yeah. No, I would agree, and he actually had a whole commentary with Credo, a friend of his, where they, while he was in prison, essentially debating, as a true philosopher does, the merits of either leaving or staying for the trial. And it's a fascinating dialogue, again, highly recommend. But I've been gripped by this concept of a daemon, or this concept of a conscience. And I have personally found it in my own life to be very true, that it's something that you can ignore, this voice, this intuition, but you can't ignore it successfully. It's there, which is fascinating, that you seem to be beholden to something outside of yourself that is hinting at some ultimate or absolute form of morality, or some truthful version of ethics that is not just purely relativistic. And it seems to be a human universal, this idea of morality and conscience and right and wrong. So I wanted to kind of get into that a little bit.
Okay.
What are your thoughts? Because this concept of a daemon kind of bleeds into, concepts of moral truth or the lack thereof. What, at least within your personal philosophical schema, do you believe in the concept of absolute morality? And what does that mean for you?
I would say yes, if I'm taking it to be what I think you're saying. Like, there are objective morals. There is an objective morality of what's good and what's bad. I take that to be the case. Yeah, I guess I personally lean towards more of like a virtue ethicist type perspective, or a stoic type
Good
perspective.
old Aristotle.
Yeah.
Explain what that is, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah, so that is that, like, what's truly good is virtue, and what's truly bad is vice. It's as plain as simple as that. Yeah, and actually, having looked at ethics, various different types of ethical fields, I feel like I've personally landed on a type of moral primitivism, is what it's called, is what I think, which is basically, like, if something in nature would be perfected by doing X, if doing X would make the thing more like the prime mover, which obviously that relies on the prime mover theoretically being God, then it is good for that thing to do X. So while this is reductive, it's not like, it doesn't tell you the specifics of how to engage in actions necessarily, like how would that action be done in X case. Like, it doesn't have the specifical, the fields that other ethics might have. I think that it's more accurate, even if it's not as precise.
Interesting. Okay, so it's almost a kind of virtue ethics, but it isn't exactly the same, perhaps?
Perhaps. Like, usually Aristotle's taken to say something like, if something is designed to do X, then it is good for it to do X. But that's kind of flawed because, like, what do you say of, like, maybe like a knife? Like, what's a knife designed to do? Like, is it designed, it's designed to cut, so then it's good for a knife to cut someone, like to kill someone maybe? I don't know. But I think you could reason that Aristotle is actually hinting towards this type of function, of a function that it is good for something to do X if it's like modeling or imitating the prime mover. Interesting.
Okay, this concept of a prime mover, it seems rather vague. Would the term God come in here?
Yes.
If we dare. So you're saying you somewhat subscribe to this.
I do.
It's more complicated than just saying that statement, but what then, in your view, is the characterization of this prime mover?
Right.
That's the tricky part.
I guess so. I would say that God is the prime mover. I would say, like, a monotheistic view of God, and that he's, omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent. And I do like the different arguments that are posited for God, how you, like by Aquinas or Aristotle for the prime mover.
Explain what the prime mover argument is for people that aren't familiar.
Right. So, basically, you can look at like a chain of causes and effects on a causal line, and you can analyze that, and you can kind of see that there can't be like an infinite regress going backwards into time of causes and effects, for various reasons. So like there has to be like a starting cause, and it's like, what would that starting cause be? Like maybe it could be an event, like maybe like the Big Bang or something is the starting cause. But if that was the case, how could something come from nothing? Creation ex nihilo.
Yep.
Like, where would the Big Bang have come from? Like, wouldn't that need a cause too? So like it can't necessarily be an event. Like maybe it's a state, you could say. But if it was a state, then why would the Big Bang have happened at the specific time that it did? If it was a state, then it should have been able to occur at as soon as it was possible for there to be a Big Bang or creation. So through reasoning like that, obviously in more specifics, you come to the first mover seeming to be an active agent. Like it was something that decided right now is the time to create something, and
there's
from
a conscious
there,
element.
Right, and from there it's like, well, it kind of leads you towards God.
Yeah, at least in the broader philosophical sense, with what I call the three omnis, which you mentioned, which kind of, I guess, somewhat define the concept of God. In terms of his nature, at least as a philosophical concept. Okay, so you're at least somewhat subscribed to this concept of God. Now the question is more which one? Are you? And this is where it gets very tricky, because I would, generally speaking, agree with that we need a concept of God in philosophical thought, in moral thought, and in these different things to make sense of things. But we need that concept, but then which one? You know, I mean, the world's religions have quite different versions, and you know, you could narrow it down to a monotheistic God, but the nature of, you know, the Jewish God versus the Christian God versus an Islamic or the God described in the Quran is very, very different. So, where would you put yourself in that camp?
Yeah. So actually, that's like somewhat of a current point that I'm at. Like, I'm leaning definitely towards a form of Christianity or Catholicism. Is where I would place my stake. I have to do more investigation and research to determine like which area specifically. Yes, but that's definitely the route that I'm going. Right now, I would say for sure a theist. I could almost say, like, I could probably say I'm a Christian in some sense, is where I would go.
Sure. Yeah, and I wasn't trying to trap you or anything. I was just curious where you might pin yourself. A lot of what you just said about not knowing where you're exactly at, I sympathize with, let's say. So, but I do agree with you that this concept of God, I guess I run into too many different philosophical and moral problems without a God, and that's been part of my journey on this particular train. Now, whether or not, this is where it gets tricky, is we may agree on that on a philosophical and moral level and all that, but then if you were to go to a Catholic church or a Protestant church, you would get two very different versions of God. And then if you were to ask an individual person what they mean by that statement, you'd get an even different version. So this is where it gets very tricky. And there are a lot of interesting questions that go along with that. So similar to virtue ethics, I'm with you there. What would you say in the, at least in your experience in the philosophical landscape? I assume there aren't too many people that are subscribing to a version of moral relativism. Most people would come down on the idea that there's some kind of objective morality, and even if we can't necessarily agree on the nature of that objective morality or even where it comes from a pragmatic perspective, we're forced to act as if there is, and we do. So arguments that claim that there isn't are somewhat funny because they're coming out of people that are actively subscribing and living as if there is. What do you think about that analysis, and then what's the general philosophical thought, at least in your experience, on that?
Okay.
That was a lot, sorry.
No, you're all good. Yeah, moral relativism is an interesting view. We've looked at it somewhat in depth, some different arguments for it, and I think that most people, at least the ones that I'm around in the field of philosophy, see that it's not a very good, like, there's not a very good case for moral relativism. A lot of people think it's actually pretty incoherent. Like, it doesn't even like make sense, and it doesn't have a good form of operation, and how to use, because obviously a lot of the things you can maybe like turn back against the moral relativist. Like, I don't know, do you just happen to be a moral relativist because of like the happenstance of your birth as well, just like everyone else? Like, why should we believe that? But yeah, I don't think it's super defensible, and I don't really know a lot of people that would even try to make a very good case for it.
Yep. I hear you. We've certainly, at least as a culture, moved further and further towards a kind of moral relativism. And from what I can tell, that has been a net negative overall in the culture and how it's manifested itself. But that's almost a different different topic in the culture of war nonsense and
True.
and fun that
Fun
is.
topic though.
True. Maybe another time. So, okay, so we're a fan of virtue ethics. I hear you there. Aristotle, genius, in multiple dimensions. He even had a bit of a shout out to the Avatar concept. Earth, water, air, fire. That was for people that aren't familiar. That was Aristotle's physics to a certain degree. Is he thought the world was primarily composed of 4 elements and they interacted with each other. And anyway, fun stuff. Not bad for his time. Seriously, I mean, we tend to. Oh, here's a good point that I wanted to get your thoughts on too. Is we tend to casually denigrate the people that came before us as stupid and unintelligent, and I think that this is a massive mistake. And the more that I learn and read about history, the more I realize that we might even have that equation backward. We might, in fact, be the stupid ones, and they may have, in fact, been the smart ones. What's your experience with this? And I was curious what you think.
Yeah, I understand that perspective. I think that's true. It's like, okay, maybe Aristotle's physics looks a little wacky, but it's like,
Sure.
What would you expect for the day and age and the type of technology and science that existed at that time? It's interesting to think about what some of the old thinkers would be doing or what they would be saying if they were alive today, because a lot of what they did have to say, at least the way that they were thinking, was extremely impressive and led to a lot of advancements in different fields like mathematics and all the arts and different types of skills and endeavors. I think there's a lot to be gained from history and a lot to be gained from thinkers of the past in different fields. Even if we are more industrialized and more technologically advanced, that doesn't mean that we are better at thinking or that we're innately smarter and as humans in some sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm totally with you. Okay, so that's just a massive point that I've encountered over and over again, that I'm reading these people and recognizing that they were not dumb. These are very smart people that, given the resources and the knowledge of the time, did quite well by all available metrics and laid the foundation for what we can be grateful for today. If you had it's a bit more broad, but if you had a favorite philosopher, who would it be?
That is a tough question, man.
Yeah, I know, right? I know.
I'm tempted to say Plato.
Yep.
Because I really do enjoy his writings and the dialogues, and I think they're very valuable. It would probably have to be him or maybe someone like Marcus Aurelius, because I am a fan of Stoicism.
Classic. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, I hear you. What would be your... I guess we could go a little bit into Stoicism. That'd be fun. In Marcus Aurelius, I read his meditations, and I'll admit you were actually the one that told me to read them. And don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. He's very insightful. He's, I think, one of my favorite parts of his dialogue was where he's talking about. Oh, real quick, I'll take a step back. What people should know about his meditations is he never intended for them to be published. They were meant for his own private thoughts, like his own journal. Yep. So the fact that we even have them is kind of crazy, because it's rare that you have written notes and journalized thoughts from, the most powerful man in history, or during his time, let's say, and he never intended for anyone to read them but himself. So that's pretty cool in and of itself. But one of my favorite parts was where he was talking about having to get up in the morning and having to force himself to realize that, my emotional state about not wanting to leave my bed is simply a human emotion that is irrelevant to the ultimate mission that I need to fulfill in my duties. And it's so funny because here's this guy that's, literally the most powerful man during his time, and here he is talking about having to get up in the morning. And it just goes to show that we're all still humans at our core. And it's just it was one of the more comical parts. But beyond that comical part, he had a lot of good insights. What would you say are some of your favorite insights about him and Stoicism in general?
Interesting. Yeah, good question. I was just, when we started talking about Marcus Aurelius, that specific passage that you just were talking about is what I was thinking of. I have that bookmarked. It's something I look at pretty often because I do really enjoy it.
Yep.
But okay, so yeah, I really enjoy, I guess, some of the way that Marcus talks about things, or the way he puts phrases is very bluntly. Is very okay, this is how it is. That this is how it is, and it hurts to hear him say it in the way that it does, but you're okay, yeah, that's fair, Marcus. I'll get on that, sir. But
yep. You will die. He likes to say that a lot.
Yeah, I could actually, maybe if we have the time, I could grab the book and see what I have saved on it. But as far as the ideas of Stoicism, I do like kind of the thought process or the ethics that are involved on what I said earlier, virtue is the only good, vice is the only bad. And everything else is kind of an indifferent. You can have different things that you prefer. Obviously it's preferable to be in good health rather than sickness. But in the end, those things don't take away from you, or they don't make you bad or good as of who you are and your identity. So they shouldn't be something that you're constantly pursuing as your end goal, I think, is what Stoicism is going for. And they focus a lot on things that you can and can't control, stuff within your control versus outside your control, which I think is one of the more valuable perspectives that they really hone in on, because a lot of people nowadays, including me and anyone else, it's super easy to let things that either don't really matter or things that we have no say in dictate us, or how we feel or what we do, how we decide to behave in our goals. And something that they really hit home about is freedom. And can you say that you're really free if you're being controlled by all these things that you don't have a say in? If something would happen that would, it by definition, make ruin you, do you really have control over your life? Because they tout that your will and your faculty of reason and rationality is something that's completely within your control. It's only your opinion about the thing that's happening that makes you upset, not the actual thing in and of itself. And they're focusing on how you can control those opinions, and that it will be good for you in day-to-day life, I guess.
Yeah, this reminds me. Have you happened to have read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning?
I have not, actually. It's on my list.
Yep. It's an excellent, terrifyingly excellent book. And Viktor Frankl, he lived through the Nazi death camps, and one of the things that he focused on was the fact that the only thing that the camps could not take from you was your reaction to the camps. That you got to choose how you reacted, whether or not you allowed your soul to be corrupted by the evil around you, or whether you gave your last piece of bread to your friend. And he talked about, which is rather dark, but he talked about the people that would go to the gas chambers with the Lord's Prayer on their lips, and how no matter what the camp did to you, it could not take away that from you, that last human freedom, how you choose to react. And that doesn't mean that choosing to react in a noble way or in a virtuous way would be easy, But
for
one thing
sure.
that I appreciate about Stoicism is it focuses on that human agency, that human will that you have. And I can't see how you can live without focusing on that as a central tenet of your existence. And then you can get into debates about, whether or not you're more deterministic or more, or you have more will or not. But at the end of the day, we all have to act as if we do have a will. And in situations like that, it's the last thing you have. So
Right. Yeah, that reminds me of a quote. I believe it was in Epictetus's Enchiridion, which is another Stoic text that I really like. It's
Okay.
the Enchiridion is it's
Yeah.
pretty good. The Enchiridion actually it's a Greek word that means like handbook, but it also means like hand knife or weapon or like a dagger. So it's kind of funny because it's like a little book, but it's like a weapon against against the reality, against your maybe your bad impressions. But it reminds me. I forget the actual page. Obviously, I could find that at a later time, but it was something like related to Socrates, like something I think that, like maybe a quote from Socrates or a paraphrase that was like Socrates saying, "My accusers can kill me, but they cannot harm me," and that goes on to the emphasis of like what is his, like he like where his identity lies within himself, within like an immaterial aspect of him, and that sure, like you can break my bones or lock me in this place, but if this is where I want to be, then I'm actually not in jail. I'm free in a sense because I don't want to be anywhere else. And maybe you can kill this corporal body, but you can't kill what's really me. You can't make me falter in my ideals and my virtues. So I really like that aspect.
Yeah, no, it's huge. It's huge, and the concept, again, Socrates. It's almost like he talks about this. He could go to death with his head held high because he knew that it's the same concept as Viktor Frankl talked about. Like he knew that he was living in truth, and he knew that at the end of the day that he would not bow to the corrupt oligarchy of Athens and run or betray himself, and he went to death knowing that he lived the best that he could.
Right.
And there's something true about that idea of like going, because death is it's a very harsh reality that we're all confronted with, and yet there's some peace, some solace in the idea of living your life in such a way that going to your end is no longer seen as a purely negative thing. It's almost the way that you lived justified the end. It's like you can go to your death with your conscience clear. And Socrates knew that, and he realized that was the most important thing for him. And I think there's truth in that concept, and you can denigrate it casually. You could rashly criticize it, but I would ask then what the alternative would be. What do you want to end your life with having failed to live up to who you could be? And that's something that gets me up in the morning.
Yeah. I mean, it's like death is a natural reality. It's like everyone's going to die at some point anyway. So it's like, if anything, like what you can do and hold on to is deciding the life that you're going to live before you die and who you are. And like, that's what's really important, not the fact that you're going to die. One of the Greek phrases that I really like is memento mori. And it's used a lot in Stoicism, which means remember you must die. And it's like a good reminder of like day-to-day life. Like, okay, I don't know when this is going to be that I'm going to die. Every action and every thought and thing that I do it counts towards something, something that I think is valuable in who I am and the good or meaning that I put out into the world. And it's also a reminder that, okay, I'm not dead this current moment, so let's go do something.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I was listening to a podcast with Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Haidt, and Steven Pinker. Quite the combination. Steven Pinker is a relatively famous atheist, and Jonathan Haidt isn't exactly your classic theist. So it's an interesting conversation between them all. And Jordan Peterson, I wouldn't even try and classify him. But one thing that Peterson said, which I thought was insightful, was he said that when talking about death and the end of life, he said is a symphony not worth living? Gosh, I butchered that. Is a symphony not worth listening to simply because it ends? Like, does that mean that you shouldn't even listen to it at all? And it's the same idea here. It's like life has no meaning because it ends. It's like,
I think that's backwards.
I think it's wrong. I think life has meaning because it ends.
Yes.
And this is something that people don't like. Don't get me wrong. It's a harsh reality. I mean, I'm not trying
For sure.
I'm not trying to casually dismiss the harshness of the world that we live in, but it's like, think about it this way. This has been useful for me, is that when you think about the primary aspects of God, three omnis, he's all knowing, he's all powerful, and he can be anywhere at once. This totality that this concept of God comes with, I suppose. What does a being like that lack? Well, being like that lacks limitation. They literally aren't limited in any capacity. But we are. And with limitation comes all sorts of different insane possibilities. I think about it like the game of chess. What would the game of chess be like if pawns were as powerful as queens? That would kind of defeat the game. It's crazy how we impose these what seemingly are arbitrary limitations on a game like chess, and the number of possibilities just exponentially increases. And it's an interesting way to look at life, because we think, man, how can we generate meaning in life given the fact that it ends? And it's like, maybe the meaning is found in the fact that it ends. Yeah. And it's a tricky concept, and again, that doesn't mean that when a loved one is dying from cancer, it's going to be particularly consoling. But it's a hell of a lot better than life has no meaning at all.
Right.
So it's something that I've thought about a lot, and I think that's I think it's very true. So, what do you think about that?
I would agree. I think that it is a lot better than life not having meaning. Death is not an easy thing, but I do think that it shouldn't really be viewed as a bad thing. I think that a lot of natural things aren't really bad things. Like, if we did live forever, that seems like we would start losing purpose and meaning, and life would be drastically different if that were the case.
It would cease to be life.
Yeah.
In some sense.
In some sense.
Yeah, these are in some sense the fundamental religious questions. How should you live? Why does life have meaning? These are the questions that I'm always interested in. So it's that religious instinct. But
I have a interesting topic that I could bring up if you...
I'm game.
Okay.
I'm game.
So, just kind of fun. We don't have to stick on it too long. I kind of want to hear what you have to think about what I think on this topic.
Okay.
But are you familiar with weakness of will, or acrasia?
Nope, I'm not.
Okay. So acrasia is like if acrasia exists, then it could be the case that, let's say I can do two different actions. I can go to work, I can get up and go to work, or I can stay in bed and not go to work. Now, let's say I know that if I go to work, I'll be productive. That's what I need to do. I'll be getting a paycheck. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. I usually enjoy going to work, but for some reason, I really don't want to or don't really feel like it. I'd rather lay down for an extra 5 minutes or something. So let's say you weigh all of the reasons why you should go to work, and you decide the thing to do, what I want to do, is go to work. And then you act by hitting snooze and sleeping longer. That's a case of acrasia. Theoretically, you didn't do what you deemed as the thing to do. You did something else. So I'm curious what your view is on that. Is that possible to have a case of acrasia? Is that a real thing? And then I'll share, I guess, what I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's a real thing. All the time. I mean, it's akin to the idea of conscience, that you know that there is a particular path or a particular decision that you should take or go down, and yet you refuse to do so. I mean, it's this idea of like what calls you to be better. You know, what you have this potential, you have this who you could be, and it's calling you to become it, and yet we know when we're like missing the mark. We know when we're not living up to who we could be. It's such an interesting phrase, but yeah, I think that phenomenon happens all the time, where you know you should take an action, you've decided it rationally, and yet you fail to do so.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna push back a little bit on that.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
I'm gonna ask, I actually don't think acrasia exists. I don't think there can be acrasia.
Okay.
Like, I think that if the person decided to lay in bed for 5 extra minutes, then they actually decided that the thing to do or what they want to do is lay in bed. You can't actually do something against your will. You can't do, like, if whatever you do, that's what you want to be doing. That's what you deemed the thing to do. Even if some part of you thinks that something else would have been better in hindsight, that's not a real case of acrasia. That's just like a temporary change of values in the moment.
Okay. Do you think there can be a difference between what we know to be true in our heads, but we choose to do something regardless? You don't think, like, can we ever choose to do something false? Like, I think that's the basis of the idea of lying. Like, you're making a conscious decision, you
right?
know something's not true.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree, but I don't think, like, in the act of lying, didn't you decide that the thing to do is to lie? That's why you're doing it. Like, even if you don't think it's true, you made the evaluation that pursuing the opposite of truth is the thing to do in this circumstance.
Okay. Yep, I get where you're going.
Even if it wasn't like a good evaluation, you didn't use good reasoning or something like that, like, that's still the conclusion that you came to, because if you don't come to a conclusion, then it doesn't seem like you could act on it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah, so I'll admit I've never heard the term, so
right,
it's quite
I
a
know.
niche philosophical concept. But I get where you're going, this idea that at the end of the day, your action implies that there was a will and there couldn't be another will, in a sense. There's no there's no acrasia. There's
right.
It's simply because you decided to do something, you must have valued it more. Is that part of the concept here?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah.
I guess the reason this came to mind, I had it, is
Mm-hmm.
because you were talking about limitations. And I'm curious what you think about, like, if there is no acrasia, I don't know what you currently believe. I don't want to go too much into this topic because it's a big topic, but I don't know what you currently believe about free will or determinism. But if there is no acrasia, what does that mean for the conversation of free will and determinism?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll I'll take a bit of a pleading to ignorance here on
Right.
the Acrasia train, but I can talk more broadly speaking about free will and determinism. Is I don't really like terms because I think they put you in a box, but I guess I'm a compatibilist. I think that they're two necessary concepts that have to exist, and I tend to go towards a pragmatic view of the world that even if you could prove, even if you could claim that we are 100% deterministic and you could trace back every little thought thing that you did to your biological atomistic state and everything that contributed to you making that decision, even if you could prove that, you can't live as if that's true. So this is where you get into an interesting discussion about what is true, what is truly true. Is it the scientific realm? Is it how you act? Is it what you say? Is it, where does metaphysics come in? But I tend to believe that, of course, we're a combination between deterministic things outside of our control, where we were born, who we are, our temperament, all those kind of things, many different factors. But we have agency and we have a will. Do I believe we have free will in the sense that we have the perfect ability to always make decisions with no what would you say, competing interests and things pushing us in a particular direction? No, of course not. We have lots of things that are going to influence us. But I believe you have to have agency and will in order to live in the world. And the people uttering the sentences claiming that you don't, it's always ironic to me as they're, deciding to make word noises with their mouths about your lack of agency. Because there they are doing that and then try and claim that was pure determinism. Anyway, you get into some funny territory there. So I'm in between the two, I'd say.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, I'm exploring free will and determinism right now, actually, for a paper that I'm writing, and I'm looking at it through the Stoic lens specifically, and evaluating it with modern views and as well. Yeah, so I'm not at a definite position, but I do lean on the side of soft determinism, which is it features compatibilism. It says that there is free will. So we have the ability to do otherwise, and determinism is true. And it actually says that, determinism is necessary for free will.
Interesting.
Right. So that's kind of my position. What?
I was gonna say a deterministic framework, but still recognizing human agency. Is that kind of the idea?
Yes.
Because I mean, a certain amount of stoicism, is embedded in the idea of determinism. That so much of your life is outside of your direct causal control, and accepting that is actually the best way to live, and then choosing. But still, this is where I think there is an element of will, even in stoicism, that you do get to choose how you react to that. Is that kind of where you're going?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I'll be evaluating a lot of different things. I'll probably be talking about Acrasia some, which is why I was curious to hear what you would have to say about that. And yeah, it's a good question of how, because obviously determinism and free will isn't something it's not a huge focus for the Stoics. They obviously do have a metaphysics or a physical a framework that they put on the world for this conversation, but they are a lot more about their ethics. So I'm kind of curious to see, did their ethics come from their framework that they put on the world involving free will and determinism, or did that framework come from the ethics about this is, because they believe reason governs the universe. So if this is the best thing to do, reacting in this way or controlling how you react to these events that you don't control, then that reason is then mapped forward onto their thoughts about free will and determinism.
Yeah, that is an interesting exploration that needs further exploration, but sounds fascinating, dude. That's awesome. All right. I'm running out of brain, and I got another thing here pretty soon, so I'm gonna say we wrap it up here. But
That sounds good.
there's again, as per the usual arrangement, a million things that need more exploring. But I do appreciate you coming on and having a good convo. I always find our in-person convos a lot of fun too, without the cameras. But this is kind of fun
Same.
too. So.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. Thanks for having me on the podcast. It was a fun conversation. I
Yeah.
agree. I look forward to having more.
Yep, and I look forward to when you start your own, so that's good too. Yep, Harley and I are going to convince you eventually, but yeah, no. Thanks for coming on, man, and we'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. Thanks, Nate. I'll see you later.